do a review in Lekutei Sichos in Chelek Yudches. This is the third Sikha in the Parshas Chukas. Here's an interesting discussion in the Parsha, Rashi's view, whether the Anane HaKoved, the clouds of glories, returned after the passing of Aaron HaKohen. As we know, as Rashi brings down, that the water, the well, came with Schus of Miriam, and the clouds came with the Schus of Aaron. And when Miriam passed away, it says Beferish that the water returned in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. The question is, what happened with the clouds? Did they also return after the passing of Aaron and in the Schus of Moshe? But so the Rebbe goes through a whole big discussion. Maybe they didn't need it. Maybe it wasn't there. Maybe Rashi holds. The Rebbe has different, explains the various different psukim. But then the Rebbe finally concludes that, according to Rashi, they did come back, it seems like. And the Rebbe makes a distinction between the different clouds. There were some clouds which were called Anane HaKavod. They were there just for honor, for glory. Then there were some clouds that were there for protection and other things that was necessary. The Rebbe talks about that the leader will always provide the things of protection, but perhaps the covet, those for the honor, that's a special zuchus of a tzaddik. And there's a way, the way there things are provided by special tzaddikim, by Aaron and Miriam, but there's a way of a leader. A leader provides for all the time, for the necessities and for the children. Rebbe brings down the Hero and Avodas Hashem, as we'll see inside. Chukas Gimel Aleph. Chazal Zogun, our sage of blessed memory, say, as the be'er vasot bazor the midbar mit Wasser, that the well that provided the Jews in the desert with water is given b'schus Miriam. That was in the merit of Miriam. And therefore, is gleich noch der petira for Miriam, as soon after Miriam passing. So the pasuk discusses, it says, there was no water for the community. Further, it says, that the clouds of glory were in the merit of Aaron. And when Aaron passed away, the clouds of glories also went away. From deswegen, and yet, even though they had gone away after the passing of Miriam, is the Be'er given euch noch petiras Miriam. The well was there even after the passing of Miriam, and the same thing is Danane Kovet noch petiras Aaron, and the clouds of glory still were there after the passing of Aaron. Because later on, as our sages of blessed memory say, both of them, both the water of the Be'er Shel Miriam and the clouds of glory, came back, returned in the merit of Moshe. Bashkofer Rishoina, at first glance, Zatoi says, it seems that also Rashi, in his commentary on the Torah, which is Limud Pshuta Shel Mikra, which is studying the simple text, the simple meaning of the pasuk, Nemt on v'divrei Chazal Hanal, that Rashi accepts as the words of our sages of blessed memory that we mentioned above. What do we see in Rashi? From pasuk on the verse, there was no water for the community. After Miriam's passing, the pasuk says, Lahoyu Maim Leido. So Rashi mefarish mekan shekol mem shona hoylem abeher b'schus Miriam. So from here we see that all of the 40 years until the passing of Miriam, they had the be'er in the merit of Miriam. Further, from Pasuk Vayishma Kanani, that the Kanani heard and he waged war. So Rashi brings down that the Kanani heard Shama. What did he hear? Shemeis Aaron and Istal Kanani Akovet, that Aaron has passed away and that the clouds of glory have been removed. So he thought that he can go fight the Canaan. So we see that Rashi also says, just like by the water, Rashi says that they had the Schus Miriam, also the clouds wasn't the Schus of Aaron. But on the other hand, even though we say that we're taking away the well and the clouds, so we do find as the Be'er is given Miriam, that the Be'er was there even after Miriam's passing. With the Tzelt weiter in Chumash, as related later on in the Chumash, by Nes von Eshed HaNecholim, over there when the Torah discusses with the war over there. So the rivers of the blood that came from the well raised all the pieces of the dead so they can see the great miracle. When Rashi in Mefarish Oif Mibomis Hagai Bizdei Moyov, and Rashi says clearly from Bomis, from the heights of the guy in the field of Moyov, Rashi says Kishom Meis Moshe V'Shom Bat Labeir. Over there, Moshe died and the bear ceased. So we see there was the bear, even though it left, and it was during the bear, was the Schus of Miriam. We say that the bear was returned and was there, as the Rashi says that Moshe dies over there and there with the bottle bear. So the phone is mashma. So from that it appears as Rashi Nemton, Rashi accepts as the be'er of the Eivishter Tzurigi came to Schus Moshe. Just like the Gemara says, Rashi also goes along that Hashem brought the be'er back were the merit of Moshe. The Mele is mistaber. So therefore, it is also logical. As that also the clouds of glory returned in the merit of Moshe. But it's like because it doesn't really fit to say as Chusa shall Moshe Yehovah nor Fachazor Sabeir. Moshe Rabbeinu's merit helped only to bring back the Be'er the well, and not for the return of the clouds of glory. That's something which doesn't fit, and therefore we have to say, just like the water, the Be'er came back because of the Schus of Moshe and after Miriam's passing, so the clouds came back in the Schus of Moshe after Aaron's passing. He says over to more, but according to this, it's still, however, surprising. But again, the Be'er that sell the Torah with regards to the well, the Torah relates how we come back. The story after Miriam passed away, there was no water for the community. They gathered on Moshe. The people quarreled and argued against Moshe. When the Rebbe gesagt Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe, Kachas hamarte, take this, the Gomer. When the Eden have wieder got mine from the cellar, and then the Jews had again water from the cellar. That's all recorded in the Pasuk, how it took place, how they got it back. As opposed to the way it is in connection with the clouds of glory, there is no talk of it. Doesn't it's not the answer. Nit in Chumash, or nit afil in Pirush Rashi, not in the Chumash Rashi. Vi azoi unven chazru. How and when did they come back? When did the clouds come back? We just learned that they left, but we don't have a record, not in the Pasuk and not in Rashi, how the clouds came back. So euch darf man verstehen. Also, we need to understand, why didn't it prompt the community to gather on Moshe just like by the water? We didn't have water to drink. They came to complain to Moshe. Why weren't they prompted by the clouds of glory that they didn't have them anymore to complain to Moshe? Just as when the well stopped after the passing of Miriam. Given that caused to that they gathered on Moshe and the people quarreled. So also the fact that the clouds of glories were left them after Aaron's passing, that should have called out, brought out an Oivgerudert shook up. The people should have been shook up by the Bnei Yisrael. The Bnei Yisrael should have been shook up by the effect that there's no more clouds of glory. So how come we don't find, as Eden soll haben Tainis of them, that the Jews should have argument, complaint, was the Stalkan uncovered, that they're uncovered vote that they left them. So now this is the assumption, as the Rebbe makes here, that just like the well returned, the clouds of glory returned in the honor of Moshe. But the question, honor of Moshe and Moshe's merit, question is, why don't we find anything in the pasuk about it? The well we find, but we don't find anything about the clouds. Why didn't he even complain about it? So the Rebbe is trying to suggest now, maybe Take, the clouds did not come back. There's a whole sort of thing. Can we really say that the clouds did not come back? Maybe they didn't come back because it wasn't needed anymore, because part of the things that the cloud did for them weren't necessary at this point, and maybe the left didn't come back. So the Rebbe said, we could have learned, interpreted, as that according to the simple text of the pasuk, that the clouds of glory never return. After Aaron passed away and they left, they never came back. And what's the reason why they didn't come back? They didn't have to come up to Danon. So they didn't come back. And that would also answer why they didn't complain, because they didn't need him anymore. What does it mean? What did the Anonim do till now? We say they didn't need him now. Rashi already interpreted earlier as the Anonim that the clouds circled the Yidden from four sides, and also Lamai and the top and below. Was durch them through this cover. So they had six basically six clouds surrounding them. And then one went in front of them. So was durch them, Hamzei Aleph. What did they do? Is Bashitz the Yidden, the Bal Yaakov Hamshara B'Shamesh. They protected the Jews so that the heat and the sun should not beat up on them. Base. And number two, Rashi brings weiter. Rashi says it further on. How you shofim b'chsuso megatzim. They would rub and they would wash their garments and they would press them. Then they had another one going ahead of them. So that's these two, and Gimel, and number three, Lam Choisam Haderech, to lead the way. And Daled, and number four, to smooth out the road and to protect them from the nochos, the various different mazikim that are in the desert. As Rashi says, it would lower the higher elevated areas. It would raise the lower areas so that the Yidden can walk. It went ahead of them, it straightened out the road in front of them. And it would kill the snakes and the scorpions. So those are the mazikim. So that was the functions of all these different clouds. The Rebbe wants to say that now maybe it wasn't necessary. All these items that we see that were done by the clouds were perhaps no longer necessary. After the passing of Aaron, the Yidden didn't need all this. That which the clouds have accomplished for them. While the reason is like this. Because where Aaron was passed away, he was by the Hor. That is, as the pasuk says, it was on the boundary of the land of Eden, which is by Soif from Midbar, was at the end of the desert. Known to Mekayim Yishuv, this was near to places of settlement. Move on, So it's understood because it's not in the heat of the desert. Is Mumados is an ort with the sherer v'shemesh from Midbar fil shvacher, that the heat and the sun of the desert is weaker because they're at the edge of that. So that the number one we didn't need. And the Rebbe says perhaps it's not only because of the space, but also the time of year when Aaron passed away. Maybe it was also not necessary so much to have these clouds protecting them from that heat. Not only because of the place, it wasn't so hot perhaps. Also the time of the year. Tiras Aaron is given, and the Pasuk says Aaron passed away by Chodesh Chamishi Bechad LaChodesh. It was on the first day of the 5th month, which is Aleph Av. The first day of the month of Av. Chodesh Av is known to the side when the heat of Shvachet. That's already close to the time when the heat becomes weaker. We know that starting from the 50th day of Av, they stopped cutting the trees for the Mizbech, the wood, because there was worms there, wasn't dried out. And the Gemara says because from the 15th of Av, the power of the sun is weakened, which means the heat is coming down. Well, this seems like going against Rashi. Rashi says, so, but that is not. It doesn't contradict. Doesn't contradict this, which Rashi explains in the portion of Noach. As Choim meant when it says Choim heat, that the pasuk says Oit Kol Yimei Oretz Choim B'Kei Chayz Choim Choim. That seasons Rashi brings down those Choim. So Rashi says that it means Soif Yimei Sachama. That's towards the end of the summer days, which is Chatzi Av Elul Chatzi Tishrei. It actually says half of the month of Av and the month of Elul, half of Tishrei. So that is when the world is very hot, as the Lashon is that Shili Kaita Koshim Kaita, that the end of the summer is even more difficult than the summer. So that means that it's a very hot day. So what are we saying over here? Because he passed away in Rosh Chodesh Aleph Av, it's not so hot anymore. But it seems like it's even hotter. So Vadort is der Tam. Over there, the Risha, we're not talking about the heat, the present heat. Rashi says, why is it hot? It says, the world it's been heated up from this, the sun that stays, and the world is very hot at that point. Because all of the ear has been heated up, the gufa briyos and the body of the creation, in the heat of the summer that has passed over, it's been heated up already. But the heat from the sun of itself, the direct power of the sun, the heating up of the sun, that becomes weaker. And that's what we need the anonim for in the desert. So maybe at that point it's getting not so hot. As you see vividly, that it's not as hot anymore this summer. So in our case, we can argue about as is Mrs. Aaron, the Kaid Shavarolo. So since until Aaron is passing, which is the summer, it didn't heat up over there. Over there, the clouds protected the from the high heat of the sun. So they didn't heat up because they were protected. In the heat of the sun that passed over it. I mean, the body you can understand, but they didn't stay in the desert. They're moving on. The other places that did not have the clouds, but apparently, it says that everything don't need given kvar nischamim kol ha'avir beguf abriyos b'choyim hakayil shover all of the air in where they were encamped, where the clouds were, so it wasn't heated up. Since starting from the 15th of Av and on, the shine of the sun, the Zrichas Hashem is not, mitazah starker is not so powerful. They didn't need the glories, the clouds of glory, so it shouldn't be on them. Basically, the Rebbe is trying to explain that perhaps we can say that both, because of the place where they were no longer in the desert, and also because of the time of the year, the sun is not so strong. So the first reason why they needed the whole time is to protect them from the heat of the sun. That didn't apply at that point anymore. Maybe that's why they didn't need it, didn't come back anymore. It wasn't necessary. What about the other reasonings? And similar to this, they didn't need as much aleph. In them was the another covered the fact that they would wash their clothes and they would press them on them, it wasn't necessary so much. But if it would happen, a yid, it would be a situation where his garment would wither upon him, meaning it needed cleaning, it needed the pressing, it needed ironing. Pasuk says, it did not did not ruin on you because it would be constantly being washed by and pressed by the Ananic Kovet. But let's say now they're already at the end of the desert and the clothing would need attention. There would be Basum. But then you can't so one could buy a garment. You're already next to the city, so you can buy a garment in one of the close by cities from the nations of the world. So that wouldn't be necessary for that. And the other thing is that the cloud led the way. They didn't need, they were already in there next to a settled area. The way it was known, base. We also, they didn't have to have the miracle as an onons or the beg that the cloud should show them the direction. Because they were already in a place they were already set up, roads were already all in place, and they were set up, and it was there. You didn't need to have going in a non-paved. The roads were paved over there, or they were set up already. Were roads there. Gimel. And number three, the other thing, we used the clouds to kill the snakes, the scorpions, but they weren't in the desert anymore. Also, the accomplishment, the novelty that the cloud from Herik the Choshev Akrabim, that it would kill the snakes and the scorpions, because they didn't need that, because they were close to a place of settlement, and they didn't need anymore to get rid of these Nechosh Makrab because they weren't there so much. So again, one argued for the things that the Anon did for them, at this point, they didn't need it. And maybe that's why they didn't return. That would be the explanation. What are we going to do about there is still one aspect that it needed to lower the mountains, the other thing. To say at that point, whatever needed to be done has been done. We needed the Onan to straighten out, to level out the mountains, etc. So Rashi explains how was this mountain left over for? Was it for Aaron? If the mountain, if the cloud smoothed everything out, leveled everything out, how was there a So Rashi explained. Although the Anon was going ahead of the Umash Vesahorim, and he would flatten out, straighten out, level all the mountains. So the Rashi says, there were three remained, and Hirahor was for Mrs. Aaron, and also Harnevoid for the Smosh, that was also left over. Was the Funzet. So what do you see? As the Anon is mitgegangen euch noch Mrs. Aaron. Because you're saying that it would flatten out everything else, but it didn't touch the void. But it seems like that it went even after the passing of Aaron, he still was flattening out, but left Har Nevoy. But he didn't gekommen to Har Nevoy, where Moshe is installing, and he came to the mountain Nevoy where Moshe passed away. But up to there, Rashi seems to say that it would flatten out everything, and he left Har Nevoy. But the Rebbe says we can say that this was all done before. It left, but it was already straightened out from before, and he left Nevoy before. We could have answered this in a uncomfortable way, a little bit to squeeze in. Those are not mashing even alahor. Chutz Nevoy, this that the unknown flattened, leveled all mountains with the exception of Nevoy main. It's not that this happened based inside dort gekumen. When the Yidden came, it flattened everything else and left the void. No, become freer. This has been accomplished before. The 3 days that the cloud went ahead of them. Before Aaron passed away, everything over there till the end, what was needed was straightened out, left these three in order to make sure the future, so that there'll be a Har Nevoy for Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Rebbe says, taking this approach that all this happened earlier, also will answer the Lashon of Rashi, the order Rashi. He said, that also would be proper or understood. The order as Rashi enumerates there, the the 3 mountains that have not been leveled. So Rashi says Har Sinai, Har Nevoy, Har. Why does Rashi say Har happened before Har Nevoy? Why does Rashi put in this level, in this order? But let's say that Amoros vote, if it's the way it happened, it should be Har Nevoy, Yidab stayed noch Har. Har Nevoy should have stayed noch Har. Of Rapi Hanal, based if we could accept that this all took place before, but we could have explained this. That with Magdim Zain Har Nevoy for Har is Rashi Marames, that when by Rashi, by bringing down first Nevoy before out of order, before order, Rashi hints that those was their honor, Ibilos Har Nevoy Lekfuras Moshe. That when the honor left the Har Nevoy for burial of Moshe, he does not give any Ashpete. That didn't take place later on. They need that so this should take place later. Nor in them zelbens man, but it took place in the same time when the same time he left over the Hayr of that's when he left over the Har Nevoy, and that's why the order is not necessarily could be Har Nevoy before Har, because it happened all at the same time. The Kavura took place later, so that would make sense. So maybe based on this, the Rebbe's question is, maybe it wasn't necessary, so Take never came back. That's why you don't find it, and they complain, because it didn't really need it. In Ois Gimel, the Rebbe explains that we cannot actually say that. Even though we answered that many of the things didn't need it, but there were still other things, and there's other proof, and there's clear evidence from Rashi that the clouds of glories did return even after the passing of Adam. Gimel. In Emerson Ober is Mukhrach zu sagen, but in truth, however, we have to say, as the Anonim haben sich umgekehrt und begleitet Eden euch noch Ptiras Adam, that the clouds returned and they escorted the Jews even after Aaron's passing by. Several proofs. Aleph, Bepashtus, in the simple meaning, when the clouds came, it says that the clouds was leading the way. Nit gemeint blois zu verhindern from blongen. It doesn't mean just to protect them from not getting lost in Midbar. Vubs and the talking drachim where there's no drachim. That was the suggestion. The Rebbe said they didn't need it anymore. That's not the only meaning of lam choisom, so they know directions, but actually to decide when to go and where to go. So weisen them to show the direction. The Richtung was the Rebbe Villa Yiden's own gate, the directions that Hashem wants the Jews to go. Und wie bald, als euch noch Mrs. Aaron seine given Kama Masoil sits, also after Aaron's passing, there were many and many, still the Masoils, the 42 Masoils. The finish was still going on. They needed the cloud needed to tell them which direction to go. Base, but to Rashi talk with Ferish, Rashi says explicitly as noch Mrs. Aaron, Chosru Lachayreim Derech Yamsu, Sheva Masois, that then they went back by the way of the Yamsuf for 7 journeys. They went back in order to straighten out the different Masois over there. Doesn't seem to fit. So Rashi explains it that they went backward. So they were in the desert, Suriki Midbar. So they needed direction there. Even though at this point they were standing next to Eretz Yisrael. Number 3, Gimel, the clouds also protected the Jews from wars with the nations of the world. Rashi already explained by the war of Molech, as we say, Hilochem ba'Molech, go out and wage war of a Molech. Where is he going to go out from? So Rashi explains, go out from the cloud and go wage war on the Molech. Was the furnace verstandig? So with this we understand, as Kolzman Edens and given a rumgenumen from the anonym, that as long as the Jews were encompassed, were surrounded by the clouds, the nation of the world did not have any dominance to wage war with them. As Rashi already explained earlier, as the Ononot Makabel given the Chitzim Ba'avne B'listrois, that the cloud would receive the arrows and the boulders, the stones that they would throw at they were all caught by the clouds. So the Anonim protected them from the nations of the world. That the Egyptian would throw, Rashi says the clouds would accept that. So that was another function of the clouds. And for that reason, Take, underfar, gleich noch Mrs. Aaron, because the clouds left them. So as soon as Aaron died and the clouds left, so the Kanani heard, so he waged war against the Yidden, against Jews. Rashi's Mefarish. Rashi explains, as there's this soon as he saw that the clouds of glories have been removed, he thought that there was permission given to wage war against Israel. So you see clearly that the clouds had the function of protecting the Yidden from the Goyim, from all the surrounding the nations. So you needed the Nanakovet. To protect the Yidden also in the wars later on. So that was another reason for the clouds. So the Rebbe broke down. The Rebbe broke down that they needed the clouds for general directions. B, they went back to the desert, so they certainly needed. And Gimel, the Rebbe said they needed for protection. And Dalet, the Oichtuf and honor in the Beis Masois, the accomplishment or the novelty of the honor in the 42 journeys is given not to buy with the gate. It wasn't just to give directions where to go. The Oich the Torah is Marich and Parsh Valoischa. The Torah at length, the Parsh Valoischa, to Media Zain. When we like it also the duration, when they should travel and how long, as Ozain the Yachim they saw. When should they stop and when should they travel? But those that you need to know for all, not only when you're in the desert, what to go and where to and when to go, and for how long to wait. These men is in Eretz Yisrael until they went to Eretz Yisrael. But the main thing is the Rebbe says we needed it. The Iker Rashi says clearly. Rashi brings it up in Parshas Balak, the portion of Balak. Rashi brings down, which is Noch Mrs. Aaron. That's already after Aaron's passing. It's talking about the Yidden who sinned with the Midianite woman. So it says, put them out before Hashem for the son. What does that mean? So the Rashi says, Hashem the son is the one that would let us know who sinned. Because the anon would fold up from the person that sinned. It would fold away. The sun would shine on him. That we knew that one sinned. So Rashi befedish. So Rashi says it very clearly. As the anon is given, there was the anon after Misaret. That's why he could fold and point to the chaytim. We're not making them shemesh, and that it protect from the sun, and they lift it up, and that's why he was media. But other than that, the sun was protecting. The honor was protecting the sun. It's hard. So now we come back to the place where we proved that we needed the anonim. So now the question comes back to its place. How come there is not mentioned anywhere that as when we are saying how the anonim covered them how they came back? Came for the Rus by Id. How come their removal did not cause upsetness by the Jews canal, as we asked before? So how come? So can't say. Rebbe tried to say in Ois Gimel that maybe they didn't need in Ois base. The Rebbe tried to say maybe they didn't need it, and that's why they didn't come back. In Ois Gimel, the Rebbe pros, yeah, they did need them, and they did come back. And since we know that they did come back, Rashi proves from the Rashi, so the question is, how come the Yidden didn't complain about it? And why don't we find that none of covered coming back? Rebbe will make a sort of a split here and saying that some of them came back and some of them didn't come back. And the reason why we don't find, because those were the necessary one, as the Rebbe will explain now in the Sikha Nois Dalet or not. Nois Dalet. But das Verstehen behagdim Adil will understand it by introducing a point on Shinui Loshin and the change of language in Pirush Rashi ala Torah, in Rashi's commentary on the Torah. In Kama Mekoimis, in many places, in several places, Ruftar Ondi and Noni Manani Kovid. The Pasuk refers to them, Rashi refers to them as clouds of glory. But then in other places, he calls them anonim stam. He doesn't call them anani kovet, but rather anonim stam. These two languages we also find in the Midrashim, in the of the sages of blessed memory, in the expounding where state as a zane given Shiva Anonim. Over there it says there were the 7 clouds. In Tel Midrash Chazal, and some of the Midrashim of our sages, is the Girsa Shiva Anonim Hoyu, that there were 7 Anonim, plain Anonim. And then in other places it's written Shiva Anonim Kovid Hoyu, they were clouds of glory. Rashi and Rashi in his comment on Torah, he writes Shiva Anonim Ksuvim. Doesn't say Shiva Anonim Kovid, he says Shiva Anonim Ksuvim. V'yashlema Habiyu. Send the explanation. The chiluk zwischen Anonim Stam and Anonim Kovid. What is the difference between just clouds and clouds of glory? So we can say simply, Anane Kovid made Pshutik and Mashmor. Anane Kovid means as literally as what the meaning, Kovid. As the Ganzer Tachli Zayred, the entire purpose of those Anonim is not to weisen Kvedim Shel Yisrael. It's just to point to the honor of the Yid. That's why they're there. Das heißt, that means, as I'm given Anonim, there were clouds, V'zeyed is given to Bashitzen. Their aspect was to protect, and to supply the Jews with their needs. and things that were the necessities, matters that were necessary. So just even when they just provide the necessities, so automatically for statement their phone, we understand the special dearness and the honor of the Yid, that all of their necessities are being provided for them. So those were some anonim. There were additional clouds. Was calling Yonam is given l'shem koved. Entirely, the purpose was totally just to honor. To show how much Hashem honors the Yid. When the phone is move on, and from this understand that nit Allah anonim zayin anonim koved. So not all clouds is understood are clouds of glory. The onon was the cloud that lowered, flattened the level, the higher, and that killed the snakes and the scorpions, is not from the Anan HaKoved. That's not from the clouds of glory. But Zayin Oiftu is Adover Shalechra, because what they did, they accomplished is a matter of necessity. To can get a midbar in order to be able to go in the desert. Similarly, the cloud that protected them from the heat of the sun, or from the nations of the world during war, those clouds were not just for honor, they were for necessity of protection. Is that nit nortzli kvedim shel Yisrael? That's not just for the honor of you. Nortzli batelis in inyonim lechutzim. That had a benefit in important, necessary matters. The fact nutz Rashi in Dimekoim is the loshon on stop. That's what Rashi uses in those places where he talks about the necessities. He says just clouds. Ledugma, as for example, but say lochem ba'amolik, say min ha'onon, just go out of the cloud. That's the Anan HaKoved. Zerki v'chitzim va'onon mekabel. That's the Anan HaKoved mekabel. Throw the arrows and it received them. Ha'or ha'or. Ba'ava pisha ha'onon ha'ilach v'nei mashvas ha'orim chulu. Those are Anan HaKoved. He goes before them. Those are all necessary things. That's why it's just anonim. Neged Hashemesh ha'onon nichbol chuma v'chama zerechas alov. Again, a necessary. Go out. The sun shined, and the sun on him, and while the Anon was removed. So that's not an COVID. Those were all functioning, necessary functions of the Anonim. Kol nechshel macharecha, sheyona peltum. The Anon would expel them. Those would be by a mulek. So over there, in all those cases, Rashi just uses Anon because they're not glorious. They're not honored for glory. They were honored for necessary things. As opposed to when we're talking about the clouds that were removed, that left after Aaron's passing, is Dor the Loshon. Rashi says the Stalku nor the Anane Kovet. Over there it says the Anane Kovet left. Doesn't say everything, all the Anonim. This says the Stalku Anane Kovet. Nor the Anonim was any given likvoidim shel Yisrael. Only those clouds that were there for the honor of the Yid. But those clouds that protected and took care of the needs of the Yid, they didn't leave. And those only the glorious one, based on the way we're learning in Pashtus, they did not return. And that's why it's also understood and very simply. Why the Yid did not have any arguments as it relates to Nanakovet, as they had the arguments by the well of Miriam. Because these are just for glory, there wasn't necessities. And by the way, the Rebbe said we can also answer this for a question of the Ram, Rabbi Yoel Mizrahi. We know a sukkah we just make to commemorate the clouds we make two walls and something, and Emerson, there were 7 clouds. How come we don't make a memory to the other parts of the clouds? We just make 2 walls in one. The Rebbe said the memory, what we're making is for those clouds that protected them. The other ones were for COVID, so therefore we're only doing for the protection, and that's why it's the 2 and 1, the 2 and part, and the Chelek is what provided that protection. The myths of the Rebbe can answer the kasha from the Ram. With this, we can also answer the question of the Rebbe Leon Mizrahi. Since there were clouds of all 4 sides, one on top and one on the bottom, one sukkah is with dugmat danonim, and a sukkah is similar to the clouds. Rashi is mefarish. Rashi explains, what does it mean? Ananikovet. Now, what is the meaning of this sukkah? Those were the clouds of glory. So a sukkah should have also had one from above, one from below, and 4 from the 4 sides. What the din is, but what is the halacha? As es is genug 2 ganze Tfanis und der dritte was hat Tefach. That is sufficient is to have 2 full walls, and the third wall needs to have just a Tefach. Why don't we have all six parts like that was the anonym? Yes, because we're going to add even further in this question. Why don't we make a memory for this 7th? What's the guy name which went further? But the Pia now is a fire. Based on the above, it's understood the 2 different categories down on it. There's a verse Mirmachon is Nord to the Anani Kovet. We're only making a memory for the glorious Anani of the Kovet. The Anonim was called in Yonim is Nord L'Shem Kovet. Those clouds that are just for purpose of honor. Aber the Anonymous is given Lifneim, but the cloud that was in front of them, that was a common from the andere Shisha Noimas, many from the other 6 one. Aber ich Meshamish given Eif zu bewohnen die Tzrachim von the Eden Canal. So that some of them were not just for glory, they needed them for the Eden Canal. So those who b'meile is euch der Misper, the Fanes HaSukkah nicht verbunden mit Misper Anakovet. So it's not connected because some of them had the separate functions, and therefore this is only representing some glory because of the Sukkah, but it doesn't have specific the number of the walls were for other purposes. As is in them given shinui, we can say there were some changes. When they didn't need protection from one side, so maybe there wasn't a cloud of there. Is the honor mitzad zegiven and on COVID? So then it was only for glory. So sometimes it's used for that, sometimes for that. So therefore, the number of the walls of the sukkah does not directly relate, because that's coming to just to commemorate the sukkahs of glory. So basically, what the Rebbe is saying here, Taka, they did not return. The Anakovet did not return. The necessities did return, but not the Anakovet. I say, now we can also understand now a question that we have in the above mentioned Rashi is Siv Gimel Yishma Knani. So over there it says, what did the Knani here? Shenistalko Anani Kovet, that the clouds of glory have been removed. Because so they thought the Knani Shenitno Rishus Leilochem B'Yisrael. They have permission. Why does it say that it has permission? Why doesn't it say it has the possibility? Because they couldn't fight them before because of the protection of the clouds. The Rashi should have mentioned the main Chidush, the main novelty, that the possibility and permission was given to wage war against Israel. Since the Jews were before surrounded by the clouds, and it was impossible to wage war with them, as said earlier, that they couldn't wage war because of the protection of the anonim. But analysis is moving. But based on the explanation, we understand it. Even after the Ananic covet that we talk about by Adam were removed, is geblieben der Onrumus of Bashit's in that cloud that protected the Eden from the nations of the world during war, that remained. The Canaan over gemained. The Canaan thought as the Baal, the Zayn and Nistalig of the Ananic covet, since the clouds of glory have been removed. The Rebishter Vice Shomer Nitaris has a full covet seed. Shem does no longer show any honor to the Eden. Is thus a beweis as nit nur reshus that there is a permission leilochem b'Yisrael. Gives them a reshus, but not there's no more covet for them. But to say that now there's a possibility, but didn't change because they remain. It's not a question. Wie is Efsher and wie kommt es as der Knani so far für Muhammad mit ihnen? So why are they making war if there's other clouds left over? Shaz is an bashitz from the morning, they are protected from the cloud. In them the chutzpah farfil. In that detail, it's the brazency, his chutzpah misled him. This to this foolishness. When the red gerechont, and he thought, as Eden will not game from them with him, that maybe they will leave the cloud to go wage war with him. Especially as Rashi already spoke, we're dealing with a Kanani, who Rashi says was disguised as a Kanani, was really Amalek. As the Kanani though is Amalek, that this Kanani is Amalek. When Amalek there was such a Muhammad. He was the one who already from before waged war against the Jews. He was waging with those who were left behind, those who were failing behind you, that were expelled by the cloud, and those were the ones that the Amalekim were fighting with. Even when all the nations, Rashi says, wrote down were afraid to wage war, he jumped into the base, hot boiling water. So it's taka chutzpah that he knows that there is a protection. This clouds, he wages war. So he once again started up against the Eden and away from Kofatz. He jumped in there. Notwithstanding, they were protected from the cloud. So the fact that the cloud was still there, as the Rebbe is learning, that only the cloud of glory, and that gave him permission, he thought, to go ahead. But the fact that they were still protected by the Onon, that was a part of his chutzpah to go in, and he thought either go out of the Onon and he'll be able to wage war, even though he got burned, because we're talking about an Amalek over here. We're talking about the Kanani who disguised for Amalek. Okay, so now that would be okay, but the Rebbe said we have a problem because when it comes to a necessity, seemingly, of washing their clothes, Rashi also uses the clouds of glory. And the Rebbe will explain that the washing of the clothes was not such a necessity, it was more an union of covet. But if there is Bora now, on this above mentioned explanation, in the Mechiluk, the difference between Anane and covet, between Anane covered and Anonim Stam and regular on camera befregen, Rashi says, as the Anane covered, that the clouds of glory would wash and press their clothing. Also, the youngsters, as they were growing, the garment grew with them. Was these two accomplishments of the Ananikoved, they seemingly are from the Zachem, from those matters, was given to its that belong to the needs of people. It's not just a matter of honor. In Emerson of it is just kinkashnik. In truth, however, this is not really a question. But in the pashtus, simply, is dos vos Rashi zogt v'av ketaneim hoyu godol levushim b'mohem. That also the ketanim, the levush grew with them. That doesn't mean as a follow-up, and the Anane Kovet had them grow with them. There's no what would what kind of covet is that the garments grew with them? Not reading that's an extra. That's Rashi gives you. That's not part of the covet anonym. Reading when the levushim, when Rashi is talking about these garments. So Rashi has been saying something else happened with the garments. Rashi brings out another miracle. They also grew together with them. And that's connected. That has nothing to do with the anonim. That has to do with the bodies. Rashi is just telling you, sharing at the point when he's talking about the anonim, another detail of what happened with those garments. It had to do with the body. That as they were growing, their clothes were growing with them. That's like a garment of a turtle that grows with him. So why does Rashi Taki have to bring this down, this other detail? How does it connect about the growing of the clothing on the children? So the Rebbe explains, when the Tambos Rashi brings those why does Rashi bring this as a follow-up to his commentary? As a nane covered that the clouds of glory would wash their clothing, is Vaglach Doker the Shaila, because immediately over here the question raises, it's okay to understand how the adults were able to constantly wear the garments, because the garment never withered from on you. But how could the miners constantly wear in the desert the same clothing when they grow and they become bigger? So Rashi therefore answers this as their bio, that every stick of his nanes, they show the miracle. As I go to that their garment grew with them. So the second part is not a miracle because it actually is not connected to the anonim. But the first part, the anonim covered, Rashi says we're pressing that. Why are the anonim covered? That seems to be a necessity. So Rebbe says, those was the anonim covered who you shofim b'ksusom umegatzim. This that they would wash their garments and press them is not given a hechrach. That wasn't a necessity. Because even without the clouds of glory, both the in the middle of the they could have done it. They could have accomplished the washing and the pressing and the ironing in a usual way. The dogma of Simlos is not given a nesach krochi. Similar, just like we say that the Simlos Chalabosa was not a necessary miracle vial. They could have taken care of themselves by getting new garments. Other from the Ribu Simlois, they had a lot of garments. That they took them to Mitzrayim. Or the Machmad of Samrakvosim, they could have made from the wool of the sheep, was from the miknazeh, and they had from their cattle. Or the Durkef and Lavush. Or they could have bought a garment base. That from time to time, became some occupation. When from time to time they were next to a settled place. So the Baal, so it means that it wasn't necessity. The Baal, as their shofim umegatzi, dur danana covered dafke. Since this part that the washing them and pressing, ironing them, dur danana covered dafke, specifically through the clouds of glory, It's given nit a inyan achrochi for ihnen. There wasn't a necessity for ihnen. Blois zu versporen sei a tircha kalo, just to save them a trouble, light trouble. Is doch das gufa der emeser inyan und zeichen von kovet. So that itself is the true idea, and that's a sign of honor. A beautiful that Eibishter is miyakin mechabed Eden, how much Hashem holds precious and honors the Eden, and the far is the shaykh to the Nanakovet. That's why the Nanakovet, that's why it is connected to the clouds of glory. So the fact that Rashi uses, the Rebbe answers the Loshem Kovet from the Gatsim, first of all, the Rebbe says it doesn't apply to that second part, or that the clothes were growing with them. But the second part, that Megatzim, that was not necessary. They could have managed without it. They could have other clothing. They could have washed themselves. So that shows cover that belongs to the clouds of Zion. It's blight over to verstehen. We still need to understand. The Baal Rashi sagt that Botla Be'er is verbunden mit Moshe. Rashi says the Be'er was ceased, and that had to do when Moshe died. Is mashma as Rashi nemt on. It seems that Rashi accepts as Chazoros Habeis Rebbe's Moshe Kenal Sivala, that the reason why he did come back was Moshe Rabbeinu's married. Hired Farvosa and Irdan and a covered Nitzuri Moshe. So how come the Taka didn't return in Moshe Rabbeinu? We answered, why was there no big deal? Because the Anane covered Taka didn't return. But why didn't they return? The Shleimer Abir was there. Say the explanation. Simple explanation of the posik is those alles was hidden bakum durch Moshe. So everything that the Jewish people received through Moshe is not by Aaron and Miriam. It's not on the same level. Aaron and Miriam used the zuchus, but Moshe Rabbeinu provided as a leader. Was bischus zum mitten bakum an Yaakov the Mayim. Yidden and their merit they get an Yaakov Mayim. Special zuchus. But Moshe al Srei and Neman, Moshe, who was a faithful shepherd, had versorgt Eden mit allem, was he provided for them whatever they needed. Und wenn sie nötigen sich in them, and when they needed. So now we can understand that as the Inyan was Moshe versorgt Eden mit Zeder Tzrochim, you see that when Moshe Rabbeinu provided and supplied Yidden with their needs, is not an Inyan atoli b'schus. It's not something as there's a merit he gives it them. It was very bottle now that he's talking about schus. That after the passing, it stops because it's based on a zuchus. That's the approach of Miriam and Aaron. Their zuchus lasts for with the lifetime, and after they pass, it goes away. But not so Moshe Rabbeinu. But by Moshe Rabbeinu, it became an eifon as a zved bavoron, as no sign petida, that even after Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, they should still get that which, even though he's no longer here, his chus is not there, but he's not giving them for his chus, he's giving them as a roya nema. They don't have to get it. Is Aval P as noch Mrs. Moshe is Botla Be'er, the Be'er was ceased. However, the Eden mer nit gedacht ankommen zu Be'er. They didn't need the Be'er anymore. But they should not give them up Yarden. They were already by the Jordan. But there was a Benegay the Mon, similarly with regard to the Mon. What should Rashi Mefarish given? Rashi said, as Aval P Shemeis Moshe Bezayin Amod other Pasuk Amon related, that it stopped, there was no more Mon. Haben sie aber gehad the Mon each better. They also had the Mon. Ayois bin Istapku, in Mashaloktu Bebeyoim, they had used, it was sufficient from what they collected in that day. They had it all the way from Zion Oder until the 16th of Nisan, from when Moshe Rabbeinu passed. So that means Moshe Rabbeinu's providing lasted for whatever the need is. Doesn't stop what it is, as opposed to the others. So after Mrs. Moshe, with no need for the Be'er. But the moment there was a need, it continued. Der Fun Ches hat mit dem Limud, when it gets to the Sea Yisrael B'chol Der V'der. We have the lesson for as it relates to the leaders of Israel in every generation. As Oich Noch Istalkuso, that even after their passing, then Be'ene Bosor Zetman needs Zeir Hashvoah B'Eifem Goli. You don't see their influence openly. Similar to the month after Moshe's passing, was Matakukiton in Belt, what makes an apostle related. Take a look, this doesn't go anymore. There's no more month. Is over that the cloud Mefursum, we know the very public rule as lo yipor them outside Marisim, they do not separate from the sheep that they shepherd. Unit nor mitzadem was afkan eimid mishametz memorim. Not only from this that he here too, he is serving, he's standing and serving from the heavens from up there. But those is the so that's not we're not able to see this with our eyes of flesh. But also because was the pulis the inyonim was in ovigiton farid the chaim chayusam almadein, that those impacts, those matters that they have accomplished for the Yidden while they were in this world, they are a continuous impact, continuous influence. We are using them also after their passing from this physical world. We still have that influence, their continuous impact that they had from their lifetime, like the mon that we're eating even after Moshe Rabbeinu's passing. This is also the special connection from this above idea with the festival of redemption of my father, the Rebbe Bezil Tammuz. Which in many years it falls out, as in this year, in the Mei HaShavua of Shabbos Parshas Chukas, in the weekdays of the portion of Chukas. This Tammuz is in the portion of Chukas. The name is Borchin, that the days are benched from the Shabbos. Because this idea of the Hemshech and the Pulan Hemsheches is expressed in a very recognizable way in the redemption of the Rebbe. You see vividly with the Nitzochan of Geula for Yudbeis Gimel Tammuz B'Yom Mahim that the victory and the redemption of the 12th, 13th of Tammuz in those days was what Gepoil that impacted as Afilu in Yener Medina, that even in that country, Zolzain, Achazokas, HaToyre, Vafatzes, Hayabas, V'chulu, should be the support for Torah, spreading of Judaism. It's a continuous impact till today. This is already raised, stood up 3 generations of Yidden that Shemre Torah Mitzvah Dinahi, that keep Torah Mitzvah in that country. Was down passed up Torah rules when you have 3 generations. As Layamushu, Mipicha, Mizarachum, Zazracha, when it doesn't leave your mouth, your children's mouth, and your grandchildren's mouth, then it'll be Matav, it'll be forever. Nochver. Further, Bezet, as Afila Azolcha, even those Bazanish and Kamaderis, even Obgidis and Achman Islam from Torah, for many generations have been torn away, God forbid, from Torah and Yiddishkeit and Judaism. So the Matzav Oyum, for the desperate, terrible situation, Utunoyim Ayumim, and this terrible condition of Medina in that country, they too are benefiting and using and being nurtured from the Pulus Hagula from the impact of the redemption till this day. As dos is it's that ma'ir. This arouses them now with a tenua from tshuva and a movement, a turn for teshuva. The kennen sich zu a leben von Torah Yiddishkeit, they return to a life of Torah and Judaism. Durch them was when the tonki the boy, and through this that we will do properly in the Pa'ula Shalom Chag HaGeula, in the activities of this festival of redemption, to mechazik zayin Torah v'yadus, to strengthen Torah and Judaism, umefet zayin zei, and to spread them out, koilul b'frat inyas mangroma, including and especially this matter, this concept which is now timely, hafotzes vayonos hachasidus chutzu, spreading the wellsprings of Hasidus to the outside. This will bring down the coming of the Master Mashiach, the Malka Mashiach, which is the Master Mashiach. Speedily in our days, Amen. And this is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Matus Masis, Shabbos Parshas Devorim, Tezvav Be'ov Tovshin Lametes.